Hey, Brad. Could you actually just put in the chat if you can make sure you can hear and see my screen? Either one of you. Cool. All right, thanks. All right, as my screen says, we're going to start at 3 after. This will be recorded. So yeah, I'll see you then. Hey everyone. Thanks for joining us. And we're just gonna jump right in here shortly. I also want to acknowledge the reason I kind of started a little later after, and then a lot of you probably noticed that even though you signed up on LinkedIn, because that's I'm sure how most of you became aware of this webinar, that there was a secondary step where you also had to register real quick to join the Teams registration. So it would be nice just to do this right over LinkedIn. However, they don't allow to record, and I want to do that. And I will be actually posting this recording a little later today, so you can kind of check it out later. I do share a lot of content. And yes, we'll just kind of jump right into this. And I did, for all the different connections I have out there on LinkedIn, there's a lot of developers I'm connected with, different leaders that probably were developers in the past, recruiters especially, and just different friends. And a lot of everybody in that group got this invitation. Even though this is probably more of a talk for developers, I think when it comes to just software development, how things are changing in this space, this is something good for everybody to be aware of and how things are changing. So I want to share like a few announcements before I kind of jump into the presentation itself. All right. So a couple of, this is more for the people that are out there locally in St. Louis. Kind of want to give, or really highlight some things going on in St. Louis. We had the St. Louis.NET user group meetup that Architect Now, local company, kind of basically coordinates that meetup. And also there's a new, well, basically renamed conference here, a large conference here in St. Louis, the Cloud and AI Summit. So there was a DevUp, and now that is turning into the Cloud and AI Summit. And the call for speakers for that conference is actually ending this Saturday. So I know I'm connected with a lot of other presenters out there, so that go ahead and share that. So it'd be a good time to get you talking. Another thing going on in St. Louis is that we have this STL Tech Week, which is going to take place between the week of April 13th and 14th. And really, this is I guess you call it a conference. There's really multiple events going on in this and multiple locations. So it's kind of like this week of a bunch of conferences at a bunch of different locations, and it's free. So you can register for this and you can kind of go to the different events throughout the week. And really the reason I'm kind of bringing a lot of this up is that I'll be giving really two different talks at this event. One is the one I'm doing right now. And then there's another one called Read It, Hear It, Watch It, Embrace a Multimodal Content Strategy that I'll be giving as well. And that might make sense a little more later. I'll just kind of move past that for now. I'm also going to be giving two new talks at Visual Studio Live. So the Microsoft conference, actually it'll be this one is taking place at Microsoft. And I'm creating two talks for that. One about Blazor, which is a more for developers for sure. It's more of the Microsoft preferred way moving forward of creating web applications, and then just the world of programming Microsoft Office. Now, I'm not expecting for people that are on this particular webinar to want to go to these events. But the reason I'm bringing them up is that I find doing these webinars a great way to just practice a talk. So obviously we're doing the GitHub Copilot, my OMG moment today. After this, I have this domain statement first. I like the name, so I grabbed it. And after this, it will redirect to the YouTube recording. So just make a note, statementfirst.com will take you to the YouTube recording. I'm probably going to have this out there as an unlisted video, so it might be hard to find without some kind of direct link. And so other webinars coming up for those other three talks that I'm preparing. These are kind of tentative dates, but the Read It, Hear It, Watch It, Embrace a Multimodal Content Strategy, and then the Blazor talk and Office talk, all of them are kind of around really the same thing. There's this product called Multimodal Slides, and that's what it is. So this is more about how I'm using really AI to move forward on this product. And I don't really feel guilty about sharing that this is a product I'm working on, because in the end, this is a product that's going to be free and open source. And maybe a little more on that later in the context of how AI is changing open source software. All right, let's jump right into the talk. And feel free to put questions, comments in the chat. I'll try to glance at it as we go. But again, this is kind of like me just kind of working through the kinks of the talk. There's a good chance I might go over an hour because I purposely don't cut out anything. I'm trying to flush out how I really want to present this talk. So I'm sure things will be cut for the live talk, but there's a big dump of content that I'm doing for this. So yes, feel free to put in comments, questions. I'll try to get to them as we go. Your overall feedback would be great to hear. And at the end of this, because this talk was based upon the experience I had. It was like a 2-week experience that I had in January that got me to this OMG moment. At the end of this, I'm going to be sharing the current state of things because after a month or two go by, there's a lot of things that have evolved. And even that is just mind-blowing. So I'm looking forward to demoing that at the end. All right, let's get into this. So the Dunning-Kruger effect, I mean, more and more people are becoming aware of what this is. Just to kind of a little bit of a recap. It's a way to perceive how you're learning, you're experiencing something. So for example, a lot of us, when we started working with AI tools and ChatGPT, we are at the peak of Mount Stupid. We feel like, oh my gosh, I'm brilliant. Look at, I can use this tool. I should tell everybody about this. And then you start trying to work with whatever that is, a technology, the thing you're trying to learn, and you start to fall into this valley of despair. So when it comes to, you thought you knew it all, and then you got humbled real fast because you just didn't know it all, but you know there's something there, and you keep slugging through it. And that's where you're kind of getting on this slope of enlightenment, of kind of really trying to understand the thing that you were once so excited about. And then over time, you get to this plateau of sustainability. A lot of this is really just time. That's what, the experience comes with time of applying yourself more and more. So as an example, like for me as a software developer, like AI tooling, I'm not, I feel like I'm on the at the peak of Mount Stupid when it comes to Claude Code, GitHub Copilot, just all the different tools out there. I'm still feel like that's where I'm at. And even like as a programming, within JavaScript itself, I've been programming for 30 plus years, but when it comes to React, Angular, Vue, and these different frameworks, yeah, I think I know more than I do, but if I had to create a React app from nothing, I don't know if I'd do so well. But other areas, and you might find some parallels in your knowledge areas of different aspects of programming or other things in life. CSS, when it comes to web page design, I've been trying to work through a lot of different things there and understanding things more. I feel like this is an area on the area of programming that I've been kind of finally getting on that path upward. As I go along here. Now, Blazor is a technology that it really feels like it's coming together for me, and I'm really trying to kind of apply more and more in that in my development. And then when it comes to just working in the Microsoft tech stack, I've been working in this tech stack for almost 30 years. So something that's just over time, you start to see certain things, you just kind of take for granted how much you really do know. And looking back, it's kind of like, wow, okay, I think I actually kind of understand this tech stack better than I thought I did. All right, so this is really kind of our agenda. We're going to be looking at the peak of Mount Stupid, which I refer to as the holy crap moment. And then the Valley of Despair is really this OMG that you kind of recognize. So OMG is more of like, you're just almost like unsure of what's going on here. And then we have Show Me the Way. And I wanted to highlight some of the local companies and there's tons of even videos out there, whatnot, that are trying to show you the way to use all these different tools and techniques. But they're kind of taking for granted that most people are still at the holy crap stage. And they're trying to show multi-agent and spec-driven development that it's just almost a little too far ahead for where people are at. So again, there's some great local companies that do some great webinars. Check out their sites and check out when they post a webinar. There's always something good to get out of their content. And then there's the Is This Heaven? There's no one can really say if it's heaven or not because just we haven't done this long enough. So we will touch on that aspect. So this talk is not about how GitHub Copilot is the best tool. Claude Code is probably the developer's favorite right now. I found a lot of promise with GitHub Copilot, and you're going to see a lot of that. But by far, there's other tools out there that might be your go-to to get you to your OMG moment if you're not already there yet. And this is not a fictitious live demo. This is a real experience that spanned 2 weeks that I basically documented because I was like, oh boy, this is something to share with other people. I didn't know it'd be a talk, but I turned it into a talk. And this is not really about AI morality. There was definitely some observations and different takeaways in going through this experience, but this is not like what's going to happen for the next generation and things like that. Even though, of course, a lot of those things are in the back of all of our minds. And just to say again, I'm not trying to sell you something here. Everything I'm showing and talking about is something I'm excited about, and I've been working through for a really long time. It's years, probably, that has honestly came together in about a 2-week period. So this IT thing that I'm working on is something, again, that'll be free and open source. And if you're interested in that thing, feel free to reach out on that. All right. So this is about how I went from what you'd see on my website today. Eventually, this won't be my website, but what you see on my website today at johnbelucca.com, this version of the website, v5.johnbelucca.com, is the exact same thing that you would see. So I kind of want to have, for this talk, I wanted to have some kind of timestamp, some kind of, you can look at the original as things progress. So I've had this thing where I apply it to my own website more as like a use case. But if this looks like PowerPoint converted to a web page, that's because it is. There's something here I always thought would be interesting, and I've been kind of toying with this idea for a long time. So when it comes to like, let's say a quick demo of this, you can step and scroll through slides as part of it, which is pretty cool. Also in PowerPoint itself, you can even kind of link to slides and jump to different things. So you can stay in PowerPoint and have this kind of interactivity. Just simple navigation is part of this as well. And then you can toggle animations. And also once you hit play, that'll start toggling the animation, just like in PowerPoint, you can do animations, and it kind of carries all that over. One other kind of fun thing that I did here is that the voice you hear behind this is my voice, but it's a clone. So again, if you go out to johnbelucca.com, you can check this out, press play, and that voice is my voice cloned using 11 Labs. So I went from taking this output code, and in a 2-week period, I got to here. Now, to a lot of you, this may be like, okay, that's interesting, but it's a big shift. It was a big shift for me because I worked through design. I worked through so many factors on just getting to here. It's hard to get feedback on the stuff you're working on if you don't really have a client for it. And, for the longest time, I just, was really trying to pull this together and like what this certain view would look like. So where I wanted to have this article view, like a normal blog post, and then you have like the presentation view or even the video that could be kind of watched from here. So when it comes to like, moving things forward and iterating on things, I not only wanted that, but I wanted, for it to be responsive, to look good on mobile. All these different aspects came together really quick. Actually, I would say all this came together, just working through the design, came together in about a week, pure vibe coding. And I'll just go a little demo on this. So, I think it defaults to the article view, and there's different things that are discoverable. You can show high different areas, which is kind of nice. I try to provide as much like activity, the subtle activity around things. So like the article view, you can press play just like you can in the presentation view, which is pretty cool. And then you have this like page navigation that's on the right-hand side that kind of works with all 3 views. So it kind of picks up where you left off. You could toggle the 3 different views, and it kind of picks up playing and continuing and working through all that. You also got this bottom side scroller that works across all views. You got a play pause kind of thing. And the presentation view has animation steps. So you can kind of control stepping through the animations. So I was kind of just brain dumping all these different features into this over a week period. And then probably that second week was more so really refining some of those features and probably getting caught up in the weeds a little bit too much. Both navigators, I have like this site navigator and I got the page navigator, and both of those can be like expanded, collapsed. Those are also splitter bars, so you can control that with the mouse as well. So a little demo there. So there are many bugs out there, and this is out there under v6.johnbluger.com. It's also still out there under vnext.johnbluger.com, but I wanted to kind of version this particular effort that was over that 2-week period. But yeah, there's many bugs on this, and I don't care. It was a matter of, it got me to, my OMG moment. So that's the big achievement that took 2 weeks, is that it took me from something I struggled with design wise, where is this going? Is it useful? Because I kind of want this for me. I'm just creating content. And it evolved pretty quickly. And kind of going through this, a lot of the terminology that's kind of used around this and adopting AI, vibe coding, prompt engineering, spec-driven development. Now these terms feel like they make more sense. Like vibe coding always kind of resonated in a way of like what podcasting is. So podcasting is something that sounds like it plays on only iPods. Well, that should be called something different. Well, vibe coding is kind of the way it feels and works. And what I've kind of described with the holy crap moment is kind of like where you get into the vibe coding side of things, and then you're probably, when you get to OMG, you're already doing statement first, and now you're looking forward to prompt engineering, and you discover that prompt engineering is key. It's not just, oh, you tell it what to do and it just magically does it. There's a skill there. You have to acknowledge there's a skill there to have these different AI platforms do their thing. And then really taking this more advanced, the show me the way is where you do get into spec-driven development and what are those workflows like to move things forward. So there's a lot of this versus that out there. GitHub Copilot versus Claude Code versus Cursor AI. Then there's no shortage of content out there to learn more about which is the best tool. A lot of opinions out there. And also multi-agent. Now there's a bunch of I guess you'd say more focus on multi-agent, and I don't think it's really that useful to think of multi-agent until you get to that OMG moment. You really got to kind of apply that first, for yourself, to then the multi-agent stuff will hopefully make more sense. All right, let's talk about holy crap. And a lot of us experience holy crap. And this is where I think most of us truly are, where you are today. If you're not statement first with all your coding, software developers, you have not gotten to OMG. You are still at holy crap. So once you're truly into the statement first way of doing things and you're not writing code anymore, you're not at OMG yet. All right, let's see what that looks like. First off, ChatGPT is an example. We all have experienced this. You put in a thing you want to hear more about, and then it'll give you that terse response. So when I was looking for a way to export the chat out of GitHub Copilot, or within Visual Studio, GitHub Copilot, it actually referred me to a good tool because it doesn't do it natively. So little things like that, I still use ChatGPT for on a regular basis. There's also Claude, which Claude itself is like ChatGPT. And I haven't, for Claude and Claude Code, I personally have not really gone down that path yet. But Claude Code is by far, talk to any developer that's doing this space, you're probably going to hear more about Claude Code than you will about GitHub Copilot. So, and that's because the results are amazing from the Anthropic models. So Anthropic has Claude Sonnet and Claude Opus. Now you can get to both of those models from GitHub Copilot, and that's what makes GitHub Copilot worth it. It's these models that Anthropic has that makes this whole thing, and for today, makes this whole thing get to an OMG kind of moment. All right. So when it comes to AI within different applications, LLMs, we see more of a Copilot being in Office, which I think there's a lot of ways to go there. There's Copilot in the Edge browser, which I have used at times, and surprisingly, it works really good for extracting some data off of a given page. Now, I think a lot of people that are not software developers are going to have their OMG moment when it comes to AI and working with AI through something like Notebook LM. Microsoft is working on something for within OneNote. They're just calling it notebooks. So where you can basically, here's the context. that I want to hear, or I'm sorry, here's the files, here's my data that I want to ask questions about. And you can turn those results into a podcast, a presentation, some pretty crazy stuff that you can do there. So highly recommend checking out a tool like that. And then when it comes to software developers, incorporating more of this, sticky extensibility into AI. We have the Microsoft Extensions AI, and yeah, the APIs of hooking into these different LLMs are evolving very fast. All right, so my stepson Noah, he came to me and he goes like, I need a simple website. What should I use? So I had the quick response of Squarespace, Wix, Webflow, trying to think of, how could he, basically do his own thing. And then I realized that, I'm probably going to be helping him with this anyway. So why don't I just try using Visual Studio Code and GitHub Copilot Pro? So in moving this forward, GitHub Copilot is basically integrated with VS Code. Now, I know there's some non-developers out there. VS Code is by far the most popular web development tool that developers are using, and it has Copilot within. There is a free version of Copilot. I recommend you pay for the Pro version because it's the Pro version for $100 a year that will get you access to Claude, where you can choose Claude Opus or Claude Sonnet. That's where the value is. You want to get the Pro version if you're going to see these same results. Let's look at what some of those results look like. Before that, let me show you so there's some extensions I want to share with the developers. I think if you're not using them, use them, especially for this experience of doing more AI development within VS Code. One of them is there's this live server. It's a popular extension, but if you're not using it, use it. To where you can quickly run your app, run your web app and see changes right away as you're changing some code. Another extension is the GitHub Copilot Chat Explorer. Again, I came across that through ChatGPT. It's a nice, easy extension where you can export your chat. I think there's going to be more value in the future of exporting your chat when it comes to maybe tying your chat history into source code. So more on that later. All right, so Fine Line Build is Noah's website, and he gave me this information. He's like, because I just like, well, just tell me the basics of what you want, for your website. And I added some extra context of like create a responsive web for this info and create a logo with a fave icon. And let's see. And so when I put that in, I got the result to where it kind of generated all that. And also you'll notice here, it used Claude Sonnet. I know that's probably hard to read, but Claude Sonnet was actually used, not Opus. And Opus is supposed to be the better one. So, and moving that forward, this was all that was originally applied. And the result was just, well, very few modifications. I mean, this exceeded expectations. This was the result. What you're looking at, I mean, we had some really minor tweaks. We changed the color scheme. So there was something else which actually looked pretty good, but you wanted black and gold. So we said, make it black and gold. It applied the color scheme. It made it very responsive on just hovering. So when it comes to styles and all that, it did a great job. And on mobile, it looks great. The effort behind this was ridiculously minimal to get a simple website. And actually, this is even just hosted on GitHub Pages too. So yes, Noah, I'd love if you reach out to him if you need a new roof. He has that knack for working with those insurance companies. So highly, he's doing well. He knows he's good at what he does. All right, let's move on a little more on the tech side of things. Here's what it looks like if you have not experienced, and but I think there's some other aspects that that other developers may not be fully aware of. So in working with an AI with inside of here, you can, here, I just put this prompt in here. I wanted to change the calendar link to book, I wanted to use bookings. So yes, I could have did a search and replace and try to find that. This is the real time it replacing that content. So you notice I didn't say what the Calendly link was. I didn't give it the exact thing, but it figured it out. And then it allows you to, the experience, whether it's something small like this or something big, it surprisingly goes pretty quick. You can change a line at a time, as you see here, or you can just keep everything at once. So that's the experience that a software developer kind of goes through. But here's the one aspect I think a lot of software developers don't really necessarily realize is that you don't have to keep your changes in order to see your changes. So if you're running the website locally testing, you're kind of running that and you're telling it what to do and it makes all these changes. Before you even hit keep, you'll see the changes. And if it breaks it or you don't like it, well, then you just hit undo. So it actually saves the files, the one or more files. And right away, your website gets updated as it's running because it notices the files getting changed and it will just re-render the site for you with all those changes. And you get this real-time feedback of how things are going. And you can then decide again whether you want to keep or undo those changes. So it really does save those, and then you can undo those. Hopefully, as developers, you're using source control for your changes overall. And of course, you do want to check in often and merge your code often. But outside of that, this experience of this immediate feedback where you don't have to hit keep to see the changes is really nice if you want to iterate really fast. All right, so most of us, we're here at Holy Crap, and honestly, that's easy. That's easy for all of us to kind of get there. No matter who's shouting from the rooftops about something, try to maybe recognize if they're at the Holy Crap stage on whatever they're talking about. OMG is hard. We're going to talk about that next. Show me the way is even harder, which I'm still trying to climb through that. And then we have Is This Heaven? And I think really this is just something that takes time. There are no real experts on where all this is going. Let me check the chat here. I was told there might be something out here. There we go. Oh, what are your thoughts on creating a net new site or application versus these tools? I understand, evolve, refactor, enhance an existing legacy code bases. I am going to touch on that more so towards the end. I think that question should get answered. But thank you for putting it out there. As I go through these, come up on these different sections, I'll try to get to the chat more. Thanks, Dan. All right. Keep this moving. OMG. Now, it's not so much to tout on, hey, I got my OMG moment. These are things I want for what I recognize in myself, how you should recognize in yourself and maybe even other people other team members. Because if they're not at their OMG moment, you're not going to help them along the way. And let's just kind of see what that looks like. So OMG, this is about how you should recognize your OMG moment and moving forward. Now, in the AI space in general, I bet there's a lot of other people. I've had my OMG moment when it comes to self-driving. So after my first test drive, I was in. I was sold. Didn't take long. It's like, okay, I'm in. I want self-driving. And the reason for that is because you get this instant feedback. You see what your car sees. You see that it sees more than what you see. And the confidence, when you get this kind of instant feedback on really anything that you're working through and working on, it accelerates on how you move forward in applying it. Now, our youngest son, he's about to turn 16. And I was on the path of like, man, we got to get a Tesla. He's turning 16. This self-driving thing will be awesome. So if he gets stuck somewhere or doesn't know how to parallel park or not confident, he could just have the car do it. Now, when you're learning to drive, this is probably not the best car to have. Even though heavily looking at getting a Tesla, it's like we held back. It's like, no, he's going to get a hand-me-down car from his older brother. It doesn't even have a rear view camera. It's an older car. And there are some things I think that you just have to just learn a traditional way until it becomes maybe more autonomous. So if everybody, let's just say, is not driving cars anymore, everything's fully autonomous, and everybody just naturally just gets in a car and the car drives. Well, we're not there yet. And the same thing with software development. Not everybody is just doing everything, just typing the statements and prompt engineering. There are so many people that are really trying to work through what that looks like, and like even brought up, like you have legacy code bases. How can that evolve? there are so many things that are getting discovered very quickly, but still getting discovered to where you do need this background of knowing how to code if you're going to um, effectively be responsible for a platform, a software development platform. And we're going to talk more about that in this part, actually. So recognizing your OMG moment, it is not this, it is like this. It's almost like you saw a bomb go off in the distance and you know your whole reality is going to change. And you're just trying to figure out what that really means. There's positives, there's negatives. It's just this feeling of, huh, something's good here. There's some scary stuff here. I just don't know what this means. But it's a great place to be in. You know, being in the valley of despair and getting ready to climb your way out of that, it's a good place to be in a weird way. So let's talk about getting there. So how to get to your OMG moment. You want to pick something challenging within your line of work. So as a software developer, I see too many software developers trying to apply AI or having it write code for them for something they're really good at. When it comes to maybe writing code for the web services or whatever that is. I'm not very good at writing front end code. In other words, when it comes to the styles and all that, as a developer, I'm kind of very functional, but I don't know. I know what I like and I don't like when I'm looking at a web page, but I'm not just good at design right away. So by picking something that you can understand and get impressed by and keep building upon, I think is a great place to start. Start in an area of your line of work that you're honestly not that good at. Because if you're trying to do something that you're already good at, you're just competing with it. You're not learning from it. And that's you don't want to be in competition with what you're trying to learn. You want to use tools that get you there the fastest. I'll be recapping some of this, but you want that instant feedback, and also as you're doing this, you want to manage your expectations. This what I worked through, it got me to a prototype. I know I was going to take that prototype and move it further, and you'll see how that did come together. But you really want to manage your expectations on where you're going and what you're headed within. You want to have some goals here. Let's just say it that way. And I kind of use this grandiose word of vision, but you really want to make your vision come alive. And when you can make that happen, that's where I think the floodgates kind of open of not only are you getting to your OMG moment, but you're like, okay, I do want to understand prompt engineering. I do want to understand how I can really leverage this stuff and make it more structured under the covers. So when it comes to like how you would approach that, again, my vision, this multimodal slide, you can check out more on it. And I already talked about how multimodal slides is this thing where you can convert PowerPoint to a website and all that fun stuff. So yeah, it's, in PowerPoint, you can do all these things and then that'll just kind of transfer over. And this is where I want to talk more about scope. I wasn't worried about the conversion process and things like that. I focused on that UI experience. I wasn't trying to have the whole platform kind of like redone for me. Set your expectations on a certain area of the code and focus on making that better. And even the publishing side of things, it's like that's later, that'll come. I was focused on what I have in this roadmap of where I called it the presentation mode, reading mode, and video player. I wanted that piece to come together. It was very focused. And I also want to mention, I have this thing where it says options. I got these higher price points. I did have this out there where I was like, this is a beta. Feel free to reach out to me. And I was having people like email me PowerPoint files and asking me to convert. So I purposely set some like higher price points for now because I'm not really doing this kind of work for people. But I'll say it multiple times. This is going to be free and open source. Any kind of feedback on this, I would love. I'm pretty much, working through this on my own. And evolving this software. So free and open source. And maybe since we're talking a little bit about open source, I really feel like open source is probably going to become more prevalent than less prevalent in the age of AI. And I think it's because how you can associate licensing. Other people will be able to look at your closed source application and pretty much copy it. So by kind of being open source and things like that, having some licensing around it is probably a better place to be in than doing more software development closed source. So I have a feeling there's going to be a big shift in the industry when it comes to the open source world. All right, so just summary. just using PowerPoint, you can do links inside there. You got these different animations that you can kind of do. I put that, you can use notes, and you can also kind of manually record in PowerPoint. And put that there where it puts an audio clip per slide on there. So these are all just built-in things in the PowerPoint. I added this text-to-speech kind of layer with 11 Labs. So I just want to kind of really clarify what that is. And in the end, it just kind of carries that over into where you got the clickable things that you created in PowerPoint. You can show hide animations. You got the notes there, and then you can press play, and things just happen. So visually, I knew what I wanted and didn't want, and I had some good reference material out there. So just the documentation of Visual Studio Code, I was like, this is kind of what I want. I just wanted something that kind of has a look and feel to where it kind of looks like a blog post. We got this image text, and then you got this side navigation where you can kind of jump ahead and things like that. Your typical, almost like really documentation system that you would kind of see. So that article view, this view was my biggest challenge in trying to pull things forward. And so my approach again to this use case. So GitHub Copilot using Claude Sonnet. Claude Opus is actually probably the more popular one, more powerful one. There's also, it was 4.5 that I was using. There's 4.6 for both Sonnet and Opus that are now available. Again, Visual Studio Code with the live service, you got the immediate feedback. And the page is always running in the browser. So you see the feedback, and then you can decide if you want to keep or undo the changes. The workflow. Now, this is something that I think a lot of people take for granted, and this is probably my savior on keeping things moving forward in such a short time frame. I have my chat history. We're going to look at some of my chat history here to really kind of get what this really looks and feels like. So my entire chat history over that 2-week period, I ended up keeping. You can get to it. You can get to that text file. And the way I worked through that is that I just kept this text file going of all the chats I was putting into it. And yes, I did export some things because I didn't start saving my chats until probably day 2 or day 3. So I had to export some of it. I figured out right away, it's really nice to have your own things that you've said in that chat as some kind of record. And this is kind of more so like getting started in vibe coding. But when I was actually typing up the chat, I just used a draft email in Outlook. Some people use Word, but you don't have to type in the little chat box. You can use an editor. I use a draft email in Outlook because I can just go to my phone, for example, and just update that same draft email, even if it's open on my desktop still. Obviously spell check. I kind of, even though these LLMs are very forgiving on what you put in, I still like to kind of clarify what I'm trying to say. Also, I'm really, really bad on leaving out words. So the read to me feature in Outlook, I forget words all the time. I'm just really bad at that. So like the word not, I don't want to make sure I don't forget not. So I will have my emails, my chat read back to me a lot of times, just make sure I'm not doing anything silly. And it's in bits and chunks. So where I even have like a third text file, you start wanting to brain dump all these different chats you're wanting to put in place. And especially when you're first getting started, you don't just want to brain dump all these chats and just plop it in and see what happens. I mean, maybe you do, but there's a lot more to kind of review and work through when you do that. Now, that's where spec-driven development comes into play and kind of where you can do that. But I think when you're first getting started, do this one piece at a time. You're going to see what that looks like. Expectations, don't worry about that coding standard. For me, for this one, this was more of a prototype initially, and you want to be ready to undo changes and just figure out a way to keep that momentum going. So the code that it was doing in that V6 version that's out there, and you can get to it as well, under vNext or V6 right now. Most of the changes were done in the JavaScript file. So this is for the developers out there to get more granular on this. It kept on working with updating content in the JavaScript file. And what that means more specifically is like when it comes to CSS classes and things like that, as a developer, you would want that to more so go into this, like the styles file of some kind. But it kept on really putting things in the scripts, which I was okay with. I knew I could tell it to move all the CSS into a separate file, but it really kept the context very direct when I was trying to work through, you know, the end result. I was wanting to get to a prototype, a visual. And the index HTML was used more for data. So like these timestamps and things like that and the slides and all that, it just kind of left that alone. So much was done within just within the JavaScript file. And I knew, because I experienced on this already, that you can make it pretty later. You can move code around later so much easier than worrying about that code structure if you're trying to work through a vision. So my chat history, there is in that file, there's 833 lines where there's a blank line between each one. That really kind of comes down to, if I had to estimate, there's, for the software development teams out there that are used to working with stories, I'd say there's about 300 stories that were probably like, I don't know, 3 to 5 point averages on average if you're doing this by hand. And again, I did all that in 2 weeks. So, because there's other little details about, what was accomplished there. So as an example, each statement was put into the chats separately. So like this one, make the thumbnails as part of the navigation. I put that in the chat and it put that on the screen. It was about that simple. Move into some other examples. Here's 3 in a row I'll share. So I said create site navigation. I even gave it a reference. I want it to look like this site. So it carried over the styles and the organization and other themes and put it in. It put the in this article, because that's what it was called. I changed it to page navigation and put that here. And I said, put it over there. And then the next day, I was like, can you make, both of these navigators in this, can you make them collapsible? That's when it put the buttons on there to expand and collapse those sides. So that's all it took when it came to moving that piece forward. Another kind of big piece, you can see this is what, line 23? And this is the whole history of my chat on moving things forward. It's insane, I think. All right. Another example, embedding the YouTube player. I basically said embed this one, and it pulled down all the different APIs, and I gave it a little bit more direction on how to wire it up to these different data points when it comes to, as this thing is playing, highlight the text over here and just how this controls that. That was basically done with that statement. And one more example here. When it comes to that pill toggle, I wanted to have a pill toggle that I saw an example on CodePen. That was the example where you could just do that. And so this particular statement was put in, and then it created the pill toggle for me. And notice it even kind of kept the overall color scheme and theme of the page itself. It didn't carry over the exact same theme from the example. So the smarts around this stuff is just pretty overwhelming and it just keeps getting better. It keeps blowing my mind every day. So inside of that chat, you'll see my frustration too, if you really kind of peruse things and are bored and want to go through it some more. So yes, the link is down here, v6.johnbeluga.com/chat. We'll take you to the whole text file. There's a lot of, frustration in here where I say, this is not working, fix it. Matter of fact, this whole part is like, this is not working, fix it. And at the very end of this one, it says, that was wrong, I reverted the change, try again. That is just something you deal with. That is part of this whole process and trying to figure out how to craft your prompt. And other things that were kind of valuable to kind of keep track as I was keeping this log of things. If I manually fix something, I just set it because you're looking at code and you can sometimes just see the fix and just fix it. That's okay. Just do it. I even started to put in like when check-ins were kind of occurring, like when I was merging into main, just because. And also if I undid something and I was going to issue another, I would just note that I undid changes. I'm taking a different approach on how I'm moving forward. So that primary goal, it's just it was to identify the best user experience for that article view. I wanted something easily scrollable, easy navigation, looks clean. So, I had this original view to where you can kind of scroll through stuff. It looks like a blog post. I mean, this is a blog post. I wanted to move away from the current version here of what it was. And it kind of course, turned into what you see here. One thing I also kind of want to note, since I had these side by side, is that you'll notice if you look close enough that the article view, I wanted to allow for where like the header and the footer of the slide were removed. So in PowerPoint, you could basically draw a box and give that box a name to where you want that to be the viewport that is shown in the article view. So when it's in presentation mode, I want to show the header and footer. When it's in the article view, I only want to show the core content. I want it to be less busy. So I started to go to that level of granularity that second week. Matter of fact, even some more of that granularity to see, we had the show and hiding toggles when it comes to the headers and footers and the sidebars and all that. You also had the horizontal scrolling that was kind of put in place and created. You also have this animation stepper that can kind of take you through the different pieces as well. What else? Oh, yeah, this is the slide setting. So I wanted, initially I was like, why don't I have a way where you can kind of initially configure where you want the slide versus the text to be placed. So, initially I had like settings in the markup, but then I'm like, well, why don't I have it where the user can even change those, where the user can change per section. As an author, you can default the view you want, but then as a user, you can change that and then, or change that across the entire content. How much did this cost? Well, Pro is $100 a year, well worth it. And then I did, during the chat, it says you reached your limit. And of course, I'm like, oh no, what does that really mean? So I increased my threshold from 0 to $20 per month so I can keep going. So I had no idea how much if I'd burn through my threshold too quickly. But in the end, after going through that experience and even doing a lot more work, I ended up having to pay $11 more for the month. Now, for what it created and what it did, that's just crazy worth it. It could have been $111 or $110, $1,000. The value is just still crazy for what you get, especially with the Claude models that you would use. All right, so a little bit of reflection here as we kind of move along here and start wrapping things up. Getting started mentally, you want to do something that really pushes you to statement first. If you're doing something again that where you feel like you're just kind of competing with what you're already good at, you ain't gonna get there. And then once you get there, then you are comfortable with it, kind of writing the code for the stuff that you're already good at. Set those reasonable expectations and boundaries and create a workflow with that immediate feedback. What changed for me? It feels like you're more of an owner. You're really kind of owning the problem. It definitely feels like pair programming with this brilliant full stack developer that's crazy fast. And the work is addictive. You got a thought, you want to note it down and you want to run it through and see what happens. There are so many times that I would do a couple weeks worth of work in 15 minutes. And it just blew me away because it solved that problem so quickly. You're going to see an example of that one towards the end for where things are at currently. That kind of still blows me away. All right, hardest things to learn is you got to get it out of your own way, get out of your own head, and just get those thoughts out. Refactoring is easy. You're going to see an example of that. It's the delegation that's hard. But just moving code around, getting those coding patterns in place, that's easy. Don't worry, that comes together later. Creativity is not gone, it's just amplified in my opinion. So when I think about like writing versus typing, we're told that, to be someone that's good at writing and more creative, you should be writing stuff down, that you really shouldn't be typing. And I think that's changed a lot, meaning like, I think it's okay and you can be just as creative typing as you would writing. Where writing is becoming more, just a mechanic of something versus like typing is where you're thinking more with your fingertips. So, things evolve over time. And when it comes to, this statement first, it makes you a better developer and it will raise your expectations of yourself on how code is written and just you gotta kind of experience it and let it be to really kind of really see that, it's better to put in statements than it is to write code. I haven't really written any lines of code, like direct lines of code in, months. I've been doing everything statement first, and it's just been crazy effective. All right, show me a way. Now this is where kind of things are headed. Let's jump into this. This is where you're kind of like, I'm on board, what's next? And you're, you're just really wanting to learn more about prompt engineering, spec-driven development. You're craving to learn more on how to really make this better. So in many ways, I feel like I'm still just past OMG. Like I'm still at that point of like I'm finally crawling out of the valley of despair, and I'm really trying to apply this more and more. And there's no shortage on content, and just these tools are evolving so fast in this space when it comes to um, how you can, make all this better with multi-agents and SDKs and things like that. So try not to get too overwhelmed, and especially how fast things are changing. And I still think you have to choose an ecosystem that works best for you. Now, let's look at as an example here. So on my website, it kind of just has a highlight. These are different ecosystems that I heavily focus on. Obviously, I do a lot with just the Microsoft tech stack, then Blazor, Radson, and Octane, which I'll kind of clarify what those are. Blazor is Microsoft's preferred way of creating web frameworks moving forward. I really like it. It's great for creating mobile web. It's just an overall experience. I have no desire to go back to working with React, Angular, or Vue because Blazor is just that good as a language and especially as an architecture. Now, since I'm so on board with Blazor and how I program or code apps, I guess you'd say, I think it's good to find a good platform still to work with. And so Octane is that platform when it comes to deploying Blazor apps, and it handles that administration, authentication, passwords, a lot of that stuff is just kind of figured out in a platform. WordPress is an example of that. Nop Commerce is a software package I was heavily involved with years ago in the e-commerce space. There's just a lot of platforms that you shouldn't discount. I hear a lot of complaints that I used AI to generate this application and it put all the passwords in clear text. Well, why are you using AI to generate a problem that's already solved? Just work with the platform, especially the ones that are open source. And you can, of course, improve that platform, something like Octane. If I find something, a feature, I would just submit a pull request to Octane to maybe add that feature to their source code or just work with it with my version of the source code. So this is where I think open source is becoming more of a game changer for a lot of people and how they move forward with their companies. Now, on the component side, Radson, when it comes to UI components, I'm a huge fan of Radson. Now, their UI components themselves are great. Now, when it comes to the developer experience, so their business model, I guess you'd say, is that they have this Radson Blazor Studio. And inside this Blazor Studio, this is definitely for developers, but still it allows for that design time look like it's almost at runtime. In other words, when you start working on when you start working within a platform and you're trying to put more coding standards around things, you can't just easily have your app running all the time and you make changes and you see those changes right away. That worked great for the prototype. So when it comes to something like this, having a good designer really gets you pretty far. So, but this design tool, it kind of renders almost like it's the web page itself, and even kind of works with sample data inside of here. Yes, this is for developers, but it just, as a developer, this is awesome when it comes to debugging without even running the app itself, the visual side of things. So like I said earlier, when I'm making changes in my prompting and all that, and it does something, if things don't render, it'll tell me here. If it applies a certain color, it'll apply it really quick here. So having a great design tool that just works well, I think, can get you pretty far in this. Another thing about Radson is that they have an MCP server. Now, MCP, Model Context Protocol, is another kind of like after you have your OMG moment, you're kind of trying to kind of put in better prompts and things like that. This is a way to get better results. Let's just see as an example of this. So in VS Code, you can specify different MCP servers. A popular one that's talked about a lot is using Playwright for unit test or functional test, UI test. But here's a very practical example. When it comes to using Radson, when I put in this prompt, where I wanted to kind of have the page snap sidebar where it can't be resized and collapsed, when I put that in, it basically shows here in the output of what's going on in the chat that it's going to work with the MCP server to get more information on how to work with that component library. So it's going to get more of the documentation and how to really output the result. That's what an MCP server does for you in this, in this example. Taking this a little bit further, so as an example, you can take any application. So I took the Radson, the healthcare Blazor website template, and from scratch, I opened it up and I basically put in the prompt, document the solution to be used for future prompts. And it generated this file here, this solution context MD file, which would be used for future prompts that describe the rest of the application to help generate better output as you change things in the code. And there used to be like a generate documentation kind of button here in VS Code, but it's not really there anymore. The changes going on in VS Code for this level of where you generate documentation seems like it's changing very fast. But yeah, normally there's a button right here. You just click on it and it generates it. They've been moving things around a lot here. So VS Code almost changes monthly. So it's good to keep up on VS Code for what's going on there for the software developers. So different coding standards, that's where you don't really have to tell the coding standard right away or specify that. It kind of just evolves. In the naming of these markdown files, these MD files, they start to get created without you kind of knowing it or even requesting it. So this Copilot instructions file is kind of like the original naming convention that Microsoft is putting in place for GitHub Copilot. Claude has their Claude MD file, and then you can have those files reference other files. This is where the whole prompt engineering and spec-driven development really kind of like, well, how do you manage all this documentation, all these instructions to produce better code? That's where you're kind of going that upward slope to kind of make all of this better. But when it comes to creating that particular markdown file, and I had a certain kind of style that I really wanted to document. And so when you're reviewing more code than you're writing code, you want the code to be readable. So I wanted, for example, attributes and things like that to be on separate lines. I wanted HTML attributes like ID and class and things like that at the top. And Blazor, I had a specific thing I wanted. So I put in this prompt and it put this in the instructions and just kept on working, that way moving forward. The other thing, the highlight here, is that I would refer to the static site. In other words, the prototype and the documentation, in that markdown file, it would recognize the static generated site as the prototype. So if something wasn't working, and when I originally switched everything moving towards Blazor, of course, I said, here's the static site and convert everything to Blazor. And it got me crazy far just doing that. But there was definitely some refinement of, switching out things to make it all Radson components and things like that. But then I could always refer back to the static site and say, this was working in the static site. Can you fix that? And most of the time it would actually, fix what it overwrote, which is pretty cool. So yeah, static site is referring to that piece of the content. All right. And just, I said this at the beginning, we're probably going to go just a little long, probably from where I'm at, maybe about 15 minutes more. You're welcome to drop off. This is getting recorded. Statementfirst.com will take you to the recording once posted. But if you're enjoying this, stick around to the end. There's definitely some other fun stuff to see here. Developer tools and perspective. So yes, VS Code with GitHub Copilot Pro. I still think there's value in having like a designer like Radson Blazor Studio and a platform you're working with like Octane. Now for coding, I still, especially with Blazor, I like using Visual Studio, 2026 in particular, even the Insiders version, with Copilot Pro. Now I'll use Copilot within Visual Studio, mainly to maybe fix compile errors and things like that I'm not really trying to prompt my way to the next feature. I will use code almost like a CLI, like a command line, and then continue to use my programming, my coding within Visual Studio. So my statement first stuff, I I could start using Claude Code or something different, but this has just been a nice tool to give you really good feedback on moving things forward. And they're putting more and more directly in Visual Studio Code in that chat when it comes to multi-agent and things like that, that I'm kind of along for the ride for that. So yeah, my code first is using Visual Studio. I think that's where when it comes to working with, let's say, legacy code and things like that, there is some VBA code I need to start working with. Now, VBA is, it's wrapped up inside of like an Office macro or something like that. I'm basically putting the VBA code as a text file and then using Visual Studio Code to iterate on that VBA code. I think you can use Visual Studio Code more and more to just provide the context for your prompts, and whatever you like using for your normal coding, use that. And again, if you got a design kind of tool that works well for you for Blazor space, I think Ransom is great and Octane is great for the platform. And when it comes to VS Code, you got Quad, or you have alternatives like Claude Code, Cursor, and Codex you could use. Code first, there's even JetBrains, whatever, Eclipse. VS Code itself, is you can still use VS Code for coding. I do for web development. And design first, I really like Pinegrove for pure website development, a designer. But you'll even find like Figma, a true design tool, getting more in this space where you can kind of go back and forth using Figma as a designer and how that kind of gets into the code. Platform first, there's other things like NopCommerce, WordPress, and then there's this plan first way we got to start considering as well. So when it comes to GitHub, working with issues there, you can even tie in an MP server to take in issues. And of course, you'll have Jira and Azure DevOps to work with for where a lot of that is being managed. And also, you got the test first way of thinking. So you can't discount, for what tests can give you. And I think that's where all these different first perspectives are really a multiplier. So let's say, a software developer, if you're expected to kind of program everything in text files and Notepad, you couldn't use Visual Studio. Well, if you're going to move from text files to Visual Studio, that's probably a 10x multiplier on how fast you would get work done. Doing things statement first, in my opinion, is more than a 10x multiplier on just getting work done. But having the design first tool, that's a multiplier. So you don't actually have to run the app. Having quality code getting tested through test first, having organized way of managing all these, what are going to be prompts, user stories are going to be prompts one day. And then having a platform where you don't have to recreate the wheel of like authentication and management is crazy valuable. So I think each one of these in their own is a multiplier of some aspect. So while I GitHub Copilot Pro moving forward, you can choose the model you want. I'm still trying to truly understand by the people that are so strong about Claude Code of how, yes, I'm just trying to understand why that is so much better than why, I can select the model here of Claude Opus or Claude Sonnet. Why should I get different results than if I'm using a command line tool like Claude Code? And also Microsoft is kind of playing catch up in this way. They have like their own command line tool like Claude Code where you can feed in the prompt. I like the visual stuff in Visual Studio Code. There's also an SDK to where you can kind of program more to what the command line can do, and also at the server you can kind of kick off different agents. This is kind of where you're kind of moving into these more advanced features. And that's what I like about using GitHub Copilot is that you kind of have this stepping stone way of getting more, getting more organized and more advanced on how you're passing in your prompts to create things. So your goal is just to build this, repeatable AI workflow in the end. Once you get past OMG, you're onto your prompt engineering, and if you're moving on to the is this oven. Let's start wrapping this up here by talking about that. All right, so for what makes something better versus what are the real disruptions, and even what does mastery mean now? When it comes to is this heaven, no one that I know is here. They're probably more at holy crap than they are at is this heaven. But only time will tell. I think after a few more years of what this really looks and feels like is when we're gonna truly have some experts in this area of where this is headed. Definitely some big thinkers out there, but it's still hard to really kind of see this where it's going. So what makes something better? You got less is more, and then there is too much. Um, when less is more, it's less polished, less perfect, less predictable. And then you got when something's too much, it's too polished, too predictable, or too perfect. Now, this is on the less is more is where AL or different AI LLMs struggle. Like you can see a photo, you can see a video, and you can tell that AI, it was done by AI. If you see some long form content, sometimes it's pretty easy to tell that AI did all this. Now, audio, my gosh, that's changed. So you can hear breathing in audio now. It's gotten so much better on how you can generate audio, like text to speech and things like that. Um, so all these things are getting better. Some are already there in some people's opinion, but it's when something is less polished is where when something is less is more, that's when AI always struggles. Now, when something is, can't be too polished or too perfect or too predictable, that's where AI dominates. That's where these LLMs dominate. If you want a clear, concise output from ChatGPT, yeah, I or Claude or any one of those, you're getting that more and more. And that keeps getting better and better to get a direct answer. And just writing code, having the right code, outputted where it's polished, perfect, that in itself is just getting better and better in a big way. So what are the real disruptions and kind of moving forward that I kind of see and going through this experience? The agile practices of pair programming, test-driven development. I don't know, that kind of gets flipped on its head. It's more of like a developer kind of working with the chat and kind of working things through, not so much in a pair. Maybe you could do it as pair programming, but man, it was a very quiet, intimate process in working through that, those changes moving forward. The being a full stack developer versus a silo developer, I think this is going to be more of a return of the full stack developer, and just more of an experienced developer to kind of be able to see if everything's on track for what's getting generated. And I think your chat history will also become important as well as your source code itself, especially if you're working out with other developers. You may want to not only just look at that source code, I have a feeling so many things are going to get rubber stamped and yeah, that looks good. It looks like all the tests are passing. And you might want to see the chat history of the person that put it in, uh, that generated the code to see where, they might have forgot the word not, things like that. So chat history is almost like code in a way. I wonder if that's going to be required to start sharing that more. Project management disruption, pointing user stories. So those of you that work in different IT environments where you're expected to estimate your work, it's that whole aspect is just, spending time to even point stories is going to get kind of crazy. Because by the time you point the story, the work could be done. Understanding the business problem is becoming even more important, and who kind of owns that kind of problem. And just measuring what does success look like is going to be really tough, especially for agile environments where they want to measure velocity on user stories and things like that. This whole project management area is going to it's getting shaken up in a big way right now. So the big question is, how do you measure success? And the work environment, that disruption, remote versus in office, I don't have any answers on this stuff, but it does feel like, boy, the more you can focus in a quiet environment, it's pretty nice to be working remote all the time. Less meetings, except maybe some one-on-one meetings with the business side to work through something, and just less people now. This is where I feel like it's not so much you need less people to do the work. I think, for one, upper management are going to have to kind of get better. Let's just say that. Find more opportunities for the business to grow, find more lines of business, whatever that might be. Recognizing they need to, figure out a way to make these different tools available within the environment. I understand there's security concerns around a lot of this stuff. But finding a problem versus finding a solution. Finding a problem is easy. Finding a solution is hard. So for these experts, they're going to be expected to really apply themselves and to find a solution on so many different areas, whether it's security, gathering user requirements, just so many aspects. I think people are going to be kind of expected to really come up with a solution instead of complaining about a problem. And engineering, an org chart is going to probably be changing quite a bit. I came across this kind of late, but when it comes to, a CTO having a head of a product engineering and someone that's kind of responsible for the AI platforms and agents, and then you have these separate teams focusing on delivering features within different domains, utilizing what is kind of company-wide. I can see where a lot of this is headed down this path. All right, so what does mastering mean now? It just ask better questions, seek better architectures, knowing when AI is wrong, so that critical thinking, knowing what not to build, and when implementation is cheap, judgment becomes priceless. And I'll be honest with you, this third point, I was struggling really hard to come up with the third point, so I asked ChatGPT. I couldn't think of anything better. And yes, the mic drop on this one is when implementation is cheap, judgment becomes priceless. I couldn't think of any other better third point. All right, let's wrap this up and I'll look at some questions out here. So I'm a first share, change is never easy. This is one way of looking at it. I think this is more of a positive way to look at it because yes, things get messy and ugly when you're kind of going through this OMG experience, but there's more of a positive trend upward. Another way to look at it, which is not a bad way to look at it, but I've seen this a couple of times. Corey House, he's a popular developer in the React space. He put out there these 5 stages of grief. You got denial, then there's anger, then there's bargaining, depression, then there's acceptance. That is another way to look at it. These are probably more specific on the emotions that you feel in going through this. I kind of like the Dunning-Kruger effect on how I view different things moving forward. So on GitHub, different repos are out there. You can see the version 6 code, version 5 code. Yes, feel free to check out my GitHub. Now, the current state of development. So on Sunday morning, this past Sunday, I was like, I think I'm gonna skip church and add some more features. So I added the move and hide, remove controls. And by the way, this is already converted to Blazor and Radson, and also one of the collapsible site links. And then I also, I don't know if I want this feature, but having a collapsible player is one, but then also where it can support video or audio, I thought would be kind of nice too. So I'd used 11 Labs. I created a video from that picture with the audio file, and it looks very AI-like because it's obviously taken from the picture, but it was kind of fun to kind of put in this feature. So I kind of thought, I did some research on how to do this on that Saturday. Then I was like, what? I think I'll go ahead and just put this in place as a feature on that Sunday morning. So Sunday morning, I did all this work in probably about 3 hours. And so it's crafting the prompt and just kind of having the code generated and put in place in the Blazor structure with the Radson components. And the big thing here, so here's the crazy part on this one, because this took an extra handful of hours to work through. So Copilot, through logging and working through this problem, found that the video files that were created from 11 Labs had an error where it couldn't play them back. So in other words, the code was just fine. It was the video files that couldn't do the playback as I would expect. So Copilot basically fixed and found the issues of the actual video files. And what I mean by that, within Copilot, this is an experience I wish I should have got a screenshot of. It says that you have an error and you have this problem in your video files. You want me to fix it? Yes. Do you want me to go ahead and download and install this tool? Yes. In other words, you have to allow these different things. It downloaded, installed that tool for those files. It applied that fix to those images, and all was good. To figure out that problem, even though working through that issue took a couple hours, it would have, I don't know, it would have been a ridiculous amount of time. I probably would have given up saying no videos, because that would have been my impression that all videos just don't work. So yeah, this is the current state of development. It might go out as a V7. I'm not really sure. I'm so focused on getting to a production version of this stuff. But again, if you're interested in any of this crazy stuff, just feel free to send me an email. I'm gonna share one more thing, and this is more along the lines I think we're just basically consulting is. So I'm sharing this on my website, different options how I work with people directly. Now, this kind of comes from like Jonathan Stark. He's really big on just, you give a price for something. So, as an hourly contractor, when I'm working through an agency, I still work as a subcontractor. There's nothing really changed there when I work through different agencies out there. But when I get work directly, I just give a price. And that comes from the Jonathan Stark model. But in this age of AI and how you're writing code and the value of that code and what's going on there, more and more, it's going to be less about hourly rates. And it's going to be probably more about, well, how much? How much is it going to be to just do this thing? And that might be just advice to do that thing, a project or a full solution. but I see this changing a lot in the consulting space with the emergence of this AI coding. And not only that, when it comes to just for having like results focused cohorts, this is something I'm actually kind of putting out there more, but I would like to see this more. And I want to share this, not so much for that you want me to kind of manage your cohort, but I think when it comes to really applying a new technology like AI, I think you could have followed the same pattern. So for me, I do stuff obviously with software development. I give a talk on going independent. So people reach out to me on wanting to do a cohort for that. Obviously, I do a lot with PowerPoint, so doing more with slides. That's an area of focus. And when it comes to a cohort, I found this like, it's best to have 3 others. So myself and 3 others to where there's no less than 3, no more than 3. And there's 3 sessions. And it's all discussion oriented. It's not about me giving some kind of presentation about that. It's about getting to the result that they're trying to get to. So it's about, getting people unstuck and kind of giving them the attention that they need to move forward. So it could be along the lines of coaching, mentoring, and all that. So these are kind of price points of what that kind of looks like to work with me. But the point I'm really trying to make here is that within your organization, you might have that one person they've had their OMG moment, and there's other developers that have not had their OMG moment. That person should possibly lead a cohort of 3 others and help them get to their OMG moment. He can do it in an iteration. He can do it in 1 or 2 weeks, 3 weeks, pretty easily, in my opinion. But when it comes to getting training on something, geez, just almost treat this like a book club, maybe, where you watch a video and then you talk about it more. You don't need to give live presentations anymore, kind of like what this is. But that's still kind of the standard nowadays. Anyway, when it comes to these cohorts, same thing. I do 100% guarantee a free initial meeting. Email me if interested in that stuff. And I'm going to wrap up here now with here are the upcoming webinars. Email me if you want to make sure that you get an invite to any of those upcoming webinars. You don't have to email me to get a copy of this video. It'll be out there on YouTube. If you go to statementfirst.com, you will see that. All right. I know we're 15 minutes over, as I kind of expected. I'm going to look at the chat now if you want to kind of share any other comments or questions, and then I'll go ahead and stop things. All right. Thanks, Rich. As a fellow knob commerce platform advocate, anybody wants any expertise in knob commerce, reach out to Rich Reed for sure. Okay, so I don't really see any other questions out there. So I'll kind of leave it at that. And yes, thank you everybody for joining, and we'll post this video out later today.